What to do? I'm Wood Dude.
Hello? Hey.
Between working really hard in my workshop, long nights editing videos at my computer, and spending hours mentally enriching myself with thoughtful content, I live a pretty productive lifestyle. Alright, I can't keep a straight face saying that. I'm lazy as shit. But I'm going to try and fix that by making a piece of furniture that will help me spend less time on the couch and more time not doing that. A modern media console that is going under my TV and going to replace the one that I currently have. The console features a trapezoid-shaped frame with a couple of cabinets on each side and a pull-out bottom drawer, and a few extra features you'll see later in the video. First things first, let's build the frame. Out of a couple of pieces of 3/4 inch plywood that I cut up and glued on some walnut veneer on one side, followed by painting the other side of each plywood piece black. Then I glued it all together with a couple of smaller side pieces to create the overall trapezoid shape. I also added on the bottom some skinny pieces of walnut to act as my base and keep the whole thing ever so slightly off the ground. Now you may be wondering about this curved piece here. That's actually a piece of solid walnut that I routed a curve into using a template. But then get this, I then used that curve as a guide for my router to carve a shallow channel into the walnut, filling that channel with some jet black resin, and then once that resin is cured, carving another even narrower channel into the middle of the black resin, which I filled with some brass powder and a shitload of CA glue to bond it all together. It's the same technique I did in my previous video on my corner bookcase, and I think it's going to make the furniture look real nice. Okay, so I'm now finishing the brass inlay for the piece, and it's looking pretty good, at least better than my last project. I figured out the key to a good brass powder inlay is the sanding. I sanded and polished all the way up to 2000 grit, so it is oh so smooth. And as you can see, the brass in the walnut is really glossy and reflects the sunlight pretty well. Now I love that look for the brass, but I'm not a fan of shiny wood. So I'm going to cover up the brass inlay with some masking tape and resand all the walnut back down to 180 grit. Once all that's said and done, I glued the walnut and brass rail onto the larger piece of walnut veneered plywood, and voila, there you go, the completed frame. Well, mostly. To help give it a little bit more attributes towards strength, I added 2 pieces of vertical dividers and a single horizontal divider in the middle. It adds a little rigidity and creates the 2 cabinet compartments on each side of the piece. And I added a shelf. It was supposed to be 2 shelves, one on each side, but I kind of fucked up and cut one of them too short. So 1 shelf it is. Now with the frame all done, I'm going to focus on this bottom compartment here, which is where the drawer is going to go. So let's build that. Okay, so now that we got the bottom drawer all installed, we just have one more piece of woodworking to do. And that's these, you can't see that. And that is the cabinet doors that we have to install, using some 3/4 inch thick solid walnut that I glued up into a plank. The tricky thing about these doors is I have to match this acute angle that's on the frame here. Now it took me longer than I'd like to admit that it's actually an easy problem. We just use our tapering jig in order to cut that angle on the doors. Afterwards, I just plucked them down on my CNC. Plucked them down? Plopped them down onto my CNC and cut a little sexy recess into each of the doors. Not only that, I'm going to add the same detail that's on the top of the piece with the resin and the brass inlay, and I'm going to add that into the recess of the doors. It was a huge pain in my toe, but I think it'll be worth it in the end. So now that we have the doors done, we need to install them onto the cabinet using these. These are a couple of, what were they called? Frameless overlay cabinet hinges. I've never actually installed these before. They kind of look like a pain in the ass, but I think we can figure it out. Now to install these hinges, you actually have to drill an almost hole that's about 35 millimeters in diameter into the back of the door. To do that with these expensive pieces of metal, I'm going to use an expensive piece of plastic. This is going to help me align the drill into the door so that everything is aligned when I put it together onto the cabinet. All I got to do is drill a few holes for the hinges, install them onto the rest of the frame, and this project is basically done. Well, except that it wasn't, you fool. Because when I got the doors installed onto the cabinet, they stuck out from the frame, like, really bad. more than Pinocchio's nose after a first date. I wanted the doors to be flush with the rest of the frame. The solution I came up with is to remove some of that front edge of the vertical dividers, so when I mount the hinges, the doors sit further back inside the console. I just had to perform a little last-minute surgery with a router and remove about half an inch from those vertical dividers' front edge. But it worked, like a charm, and with the doors installed, I just needed to do some final sanding and slap on some finish. With that, the woodworking part of this project is done. We can now focus on the electronics part of this TV console build. It took me about a week to code and put together the electronics for this project. Now, all of the electronics for this build are going to be housed here. Ow. Damn it. Going to be housed here. The open part of this console. Now, to get my lazy ass off the couch, it's going to be done in 4 stages. Now, the first thing the console needs to be able to do is detect when I first sit down on the couch. Now, I thought about some fancy ways to do this with a camera and some computer vision software, but then I had a simpler idea. Every time, almost immediately, when I sit on the couch, I turn the TV on. So, I just need to know when the TV is turned on and start the timer at that moment, which is easy to do with this, a smart plug that I got off of Amazon. I insert this plug in between the outlet and the TV power cable. Once the TV is on, it will start drawing power, or more specifically current, through the smart plug. That current can be measured by the smart plug, and then wirelessly sent over Wi-Fi to this circuit board, also called ESP32. Then the ESP32 sends a signal to an Arduino Uno. Now, I skipped over and simplified all this logic quite a bit. I didn't even talk about the MQTT broker and the protocols the smart plug uses to communicate over Wi-Fi, but not important. Once the Arduino gets a signal from the ESP32 that the TV has been turned on, a countdown timer begins.
What timer?
Once the timer hits 10 minutes from when the TV is turned on, the console will lovingly motivate me to get off the couch by displaying some positive messages. These messages are displayed on an 8x32 pixel array that is hooked up to the Arduino Uno.
Hey, yeah, there you go. Hell yeah. It works.
A few of these motivational messages were generated from ChatGPT, and they're okay. But some of the messages were created from deeply repressed childhood memories.
I'm not a koala boy.
The LED pixel array is all stored in a 3D printed housing bracket thingy and glued onto a piece of veneered walnut. But if that doesn't work, then it's time to step it up a little bit. When trying to convince someone to do something, if kind motivation doesn't work, then annoying the shit out of them probably will. And after 20 minutes, if the TV is still on, the console will take matters into its own metaphorical hands, and it will turn the TV off for you.
What the? Stop that.
Origins.
No.
This is going to go on for a little bit. Because the Arduino Uno is connected to the ESP32, we can send a signal to the ESP32, which then sends a command over Wi-Fi to the smart plug to turn the TV off. Now, if after all that we are still unsuccessful with getting butt off of couch, then we move on to the final stage.
Stop.
I thought long and hard about this final stage, thinking through all the different possibilities. But in the end, I realized that all I needed to do is get me, off the couch just for a few seconds. Most of the time, standing up off the couch is all it takes for me to start doing whatever shit I need to do. Once I figured that part out, the solution was obvious.
Son of a bitch.
I just added an alarm. This high-pitched noise is coming from this, a tiny electronic speaker, also called a piezo speaker.
Oh my god, that's so loud.
It starts at around 30 minutes from when the TV was turned on. Now, I thought about using an air horn, but I live in an apartment and prefer not to be hunted down by my neighbors. The noise doesn't stop until you hit this button, which in this case is on the front of the console, right under the piezo speaker.
Oh, thank God.
And now that I'm up, it's easier to do the things that I need to do.
Fine, I'll do the fucking dishes. Oh, God.
Good! And you better use actual soap this time. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you have a good day. Peace.